Hi there, and welcome back again. I'm glad that you decided to join me for part 2 of the Jerry Brudos case. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, I highly recommend that you go ahead and stop this video, go watch part 1, and come back, because in part 1 we discussed Jerry's upbringing, his childhood, and all of the little criminal activities that he was up to that eventually led him to homicide. We ended part 1 with 2 fishermen finding the remains of a woman in the Long Tom River in Oregon, and with the police fishing that young woman out of the river and identifying her as Linda Sallee. A couple of days later, they also found Karen Sprinker, and they are going to be on the lookout for their killer. Of course, we know it's Jerry, but they don't know that yet. We're just gonna pick right up where we left off. So you may remember that both Linda and Karen were students at Oregon State University, and because of this, the police suspect that whoever killed them is targeting young women on the Oregon State campus. So the first thing that investigators do is go to campus and just start questioning women who go to school there, asking them if they've seen anybody strange, if they've had any weird experiences, if anybody's been harassing them. Well, the police didn't know this, but Jerry had recently decided to start kind of cold calling women in their dorm rooms. And I couldn't get a great feel for what the dorm room phone situation was like in 1968, 69, but it sounds like what was happening is there would be some sort of common telephone in like a common area, and that he would call and then he would just ask for like Carol or Susan. He would just make up a generic girl's name. And inevitably, whoever picked up the phone would know someone in that dorm room by that name and pass the phone off to them. Once he had this random girl on the phone, he would chit-chat and ask her out on a date. Now, mind you, he doesn't know them. They don't know him. He's just literally cold calling for a date. Of course, he doesn't really want to go out with these girls. He doesn't really care who they are so much. He wants to take them back to his murder dungeon. Now, you might, like me, have the initial thought of how could that possibly work? Who is going to just go out with some rando sight unseen? That was my initial reaction to finding out about this little scheme he had going. And then I started thinking, well, in 1969, people used to like hitchhike as a primary form of transportation, something that is almost unthinkable about doing today. 69 also saw the famous Summer of Love, sort of the height of the sexual revolution. So maybe people were just a little more open, a little bit more free, a little more trusting. But then I started thinking, well, is this really any different than what we do now? Is this different than Tinder, for instance, where you just swipe right or swipe left? You meet somebody who you don't know for a random hookup. I mean, you think that you know them because you can talk to them through text. You don't even hear their voices most of the time. At least Jerry's calling and having a conversation. They can hear his actual voice. And we get lulled into this sort of false sense of security just because we, can see a profile pic? Realistically, they could be anyone. In fact, some of you out there might have a story of a pretty negative internet dating experience where the person who showed up for the date wasn't quite the person they had portrayed themselves to be online. The way that we do it now, online, really just gives an illusion of familiarity. And I think that it can be really easy to judge people from the past because we have the benefit of hindsight. So I just wanted to bring that up because my initial reaction to this was just like, who are these girls? Who are these girls who are willing to go out with this guy who's just randomly calling them? But it happened, and I think it would still happen today. One of these co-eds that had answered a call from Jerry did end up agreeing to go out on a date with him. When he comes to pick her up in his car, like you do, they take off, and he says something to her that absolutely chills her, and she remembers it. It really sticks with her because he looked at her and said, "How did you know I wasn't going to kill you and throw you in the river?" Now remember that the reports of the young women that they had found in the Long Tom River have been on the news everywhere, and the police have just been at the campus asking if anything weird was going on, if there were any weird guys or people harassing them. So this is fresh in her mind. And he says something like this. Now, if it had just been oh, how did you know you could trust me? Maybe she could have brushed it off. He said, "How did you know I wasn't going to kill you and throw you in the river?" That is very specific language. So as soon as she can, she gets away, she goes back to campus, and she calls the police to let them know about her experience. This to them sounds very, very promising. And they ask her, "Hey, would you be willing to call him back up and arrange another date?" And she agrees. She sets up a date with him that she is never going to show up for. Instead, on the specified date and time, Jerry pulls up to find not the attractive college student he was looking for, but the police. They bring him in for questioning. They kind of grill him about where he was. It's not really going anywhere. This is a story we've heard over and over again. They can't really hold him because they don't have any evidence to hold him on. He didn't hurt this girl that he went out with. They have nothing. So unfortunately, they have to let him go. But they do go ahead and put him under surveillance so that they can kind of keep an eye on his movements while they investigate a little further to see if they've got something a little more concrete to bring him in on. So while Jerry is out there being a free man, the police are doing a little investigating, and part of that investigation involves taking a photo of Jerry Brudos in like a photo lineup. You see it on all the cop shows. They've got a whole bunch of different dudes in there. One of them is the guy that they suspect. They take this photo lineup and they show it around to women who had made reports of like stranger attacks, they were just randomly attacked by a man. They want to see if anybody recognizes Jerry. One of these women was 24-year-old mother Sharon Wood. Sharon had an absolutely terrifying experience on April 21st of that year in the parking garage where she parked to go to work. So at some point near the end of the workday, she realized that she could not find her car keys. She looked in her desk, she looked everywhere. They were nowhere to be found. She decides she's gonna just leave work a few minutes early, go to the parking garage, and see if she maybe left her keys in her car. Unfortunately, when she gets there, we've all been there, right? She gets there, she doesn't remember where she parked. It's a, multi-level deal. You know what a parking garage looks like. I don't know, I'm explaining it. And she's walking around this parking garage, which, by the way, parking garages creep me out anyway. They're just monotone and gray and dark and very cold looking, and I'm not a fan in general. And she's all alone in this parking garage, and she's getting a little flustered, walking back and forth, up and down, having really no clue where she had put her car that morning. Now, as she's getting more and more frustrated, more and more flustered about this, she sort of notices that there is someone walking behind her. She turns just a little bit to catch a man in her peripheral, several, feet behind her, several yards behind her. She kind of brushes it off. He's just there probably to find his car too. And she keeps looking. It's not that long though before she feels a little tap on her shoulder. She turns and she sees the man who had been behind her before, but this time he's right up on her. He says, "You too?" which she took to mean like he also couldn't find his car, but she does not fall for this nice guy, buddy pal routine that he's going for. It creeped her out. She immediately tries to bolt, but she doesn't get very far before he pulls a gun out of his pocket. He tells her, "If you don't scream, I won't shoot you." Well, Miss Sharon Wood is having none of that. She has babies to get home to, and she starts screaming her head off. Now, the man starts to get pissed, right? Not only is her screaming potentially going to alert somebody and ruin whatever the plans are that he has for her, but since we know it's Jerry Brudos, we know that he's also angry because she's not playing into his fantasy. She's not doing what she's told. She's not submitting to him. She's being a strong, independent woman who's not going to take orders from this guy who's trying to assault her. Now, she doesn't know what is going on here, of course, because she doesn't know who this is. But we do. And we know that this is going to make him very, very angry. So he lunges toward her and he wraps his arm around her throat in an attempt to put her in like a chokehold, basically to silence her, maybe even choke her unconscious. But when he does this, because he's frantic and she's frantic, he actually ends up hooking his thumb into her mouth. And Sharon is not taking any chances. She bites down and she bites down hard and she does not let go. Now, it isn't just her will that is keeping her clamped down on his little digit there. She describes it as a fear paralysis. Her adrenaline is pumping. She is fighting for her life against a man that is much larger than she is, and her jaw just locked up, and she could not let go of that sucker even if she had wanted to. So just about this time, he's trying to wrestle his hand out her mouth. She's fighting for dear life. They hear a car start up somewhere in the garage. They both hear it. And Jerry freaks out, right? Because he thinks he's about to get caught. There's this woman here who he's trying to victimize, and she will not let go of his thumb. He ends up grabbing Sharon by her hair and beating her head into the hard concrete floor until she kind of just goes limp. Her jaw unlocks and he is able to pull his thumb out of her mouth. He then just leaves Sharon there, beaten up, bloody, and scared, just lying on the floor of the garage. Now, Sharon is not unconscious. She is stunned, but she's not unconscious. She actually thought that she was dead. She was sure with what had just happened to her that she had died, but she wasn't dead. She had survived this encounter. And she's very lucky because she had no way of knowing this. But the man that she had just encountered was, in fact, a murderer. Sharon immediately reports this to the police, but of course, she doesn't have anything to go by. So they just kind of file the report, and that's all that really can be done at that point. But when the police showed up in May with that photo of Jerry, Sharon looked at it and identified the man who had beaten her so badly in that parking garage a month earlier. This was a good concrete accusation that they could go on in order to arrest Jerry and actually get to keep him for a little while. It turned out he had also attacked a 15-year-old girl the day after he attacked Sharon, and this girl was also able to identify Jerry in the photo lineup. So on May 30th, 1969, they go ahead and put out an arrest warrant for the assault charges. They're hoping, of course, that once they pick him up, they can hold him because he'll have actually been charged with something, and they're going to continue to then look for evidence. Once he's arrested, that usually does give them the option to go to his house and like search his house and stuff like that. So that's what they're hoping for. But the thing is, when they go to make the arrest, Jerry has fled. So there's no one at his house. Not him, not Darcy, not the kids. Everybody's gone. They track him down, or they think they track him down to a friend's house that he had apparently been staying at. There's nobody there either. So they put out kind of like an all points bulletin looking for his car, or him, or anyone in the Brudos family. Fortunately, it doesn't take them very long, a day or two, and the car is located. Darcy is driving, and she has both the children with her, but there's no sign of Jerry. Luckily, because there is the warrant out, they have the freedom to just search the family vehicle. And of course, when they search, they find Jerry really quickly because he is curled up, hiding under a blanket in the back seat of the car like the sniveling coward that he is. This time, when they bring him in for questioning, he pretty much starts confessing immediately, but not to just the assaults and the 2 murders. He confesses to 4 murders. Now, this is a little more than the cops had bargained for. Remember, they only had 2 bodies. But Jerry starts right in telling them about what he claims was his first homicide. It was a young woman named Linda Slauson. She had shown up to his house on January 15th of 1968, selling encyclopedias door to door. Brudos simply invited her into his home under the pretense of her making a sale. He said he was interested in her encyclopedias. Now, Linda might otherwise have felt uncomfortable just kind of going into a stranger's home. A single guy in his 30s might have sort of, no thanks, whatever. But first of all, Jerry was really, really good at being the nice guy, the family man. He was very unassuming, very friendly. But on top of that, his kids were there. She could see them and hear them playing, and his mother was there with the kids. So this probably did not send up a lot of red flags. This is just a guy here at home with his family. What could possibly happen? She felt comfortable enough to go into his house. Like, who's gonna do something to somebody right there in front of their kids? But this is exactly why Jerry Brudos is so scary. This is how he kept his anonymity. In my personal opinion, this whole persona that he could put on that would make people comfortable with him and lure them in is probably the whole reason he even bothered with a family in the first place. He certainly didn't care about them as individuals. He's probably not really capable of feeling love in the same way that you and I are. I mean, in order to feel love, you have to have empathy. Jerry had none. His family were useful to him. His wife and his children were useful to him as a cover. But I think that that's all they meant to him. They just presented a lovely facade to make him look less suspicious while he carried on with all of his secret obsessions. So Linda Slauson, just 19 years old, walks into the lion's den very much of her own free will. Brudos asks her to follow him down to the basement to discuss the sale. And if This did give her a moment's hesitation. It certainly would have been set aside by the sounds of laughing children just the floor above. But once Brudos got her down to his secret room with all of the padlocks and the bolts that no one was allowed in except for him, he hit her in the head with a 2x4 and knocked her out cold, and then strangled her to death right there with his mother and his children in the same house. Now, the killing is not really part of his fantasy. The killing is just a means to an end to get what he really wants: the ultimate submissive woman. No opinions, no desires, no struggle, no consent, just a body and feet dressed in lovely high-heeled shoes. He took his time over the next several hours dressing and undressing Linda in lingerie and shoes from his own private collection. All those pieces that he's stolen over the years. But eventually, his sick little thrill had to come to an end. He realized that at some point he was going to have to get rid of the body. But he couldn't quite bring himself to let go of all of her. Before he tied Linda to a car part and dumped her body in the Willamette River, he sawed off one foot, and he kept that foot in a freezer that he had in his secret little basement dungeon room. He would frequently take the appendage out to relive his horrific crime and would use it as a sort of model, slipping it into various shoes from his vast hoard, like some kind of Rob Zombie adaptation of Cinderella. In November of '68, about 10 months after he had murdered Slauson, Jerry Brudos came across 23-year-old Jan Whitney. Now, by this point, the Brudos family had moved out of the house that had the wackadoodle workshop in the basement. But Jerry had recreated his homicide hovel in a sort of detached, semi-detached garage/shed situation that was right next to the new house. So by the time he happened across Jan Whitney, he was well prepared to kill again. He saw Jan's car broken down on the side of the road pretty near his house, and putting on his Good Samaritan costume, he stopped and asked her if she needed some help. He told her he lived nearby and that he could take her to his house to get some tools and stuff. Then they'd come back. He would fix up her car for her and get her on the way to Oregon State University, which is where she was headed. And Jan immediately agreed to this arrangement. I mean, she didn't want to stay stranded alone for too long. There's weirdos out there. It's not safe. Once the young woman was settled into the passenger seat of the car, Brudos got into the back seat, and before Jan could even know what was happening, he had slipped a leather strap around her neck. He pulled it tight and then closed it into the back door to keep the tension. He then drove back to his house while the 23-year-old woman asphyxiated beside him. She is dead by the time he gets home. He brings her body from the car into his new special room, and he uses it for intercourse. Over the next few days, he spends a lot of time brutalizing Jan's body, really playing with it like a cat with a mouse. Finally, he removed one breast, and he used that to make a mold, which he then used to make a paperweight. And then he tossed her into the Willamette River, tied to a car part, just like he had Linda Slauson. He also disposed of Linda's foot at this time. So we see here that Brudos has escalated between his first and his second murders. He keeps the remains for longer. He is far more brutal, and he's now added necrophilia to his litany of depravity. After he murdered Jan Whitney, he moved her car far away from his house, abandoning it at a service station where it was found without Jan. Just 4 months later, he took his next victim, Karen Sprinker. Now, the police know about Karen. Her body, remember, was found along with Linda Solis in the Long Tom River. But during his confession, Jerry sort of fills in some of the blanks for the when and the how. Brudos abducted Karen from a parking garage at gunpoint, just like he had tried to do with Sharon Wood. He forced her into his car, took her back to his little workshop, and he assaults her while she is still alive. He then takes a bunch of pictures of her in the nude. Now, these pictures will become very, very important when it comes to the trial. He then hanged her until she was dead and assaulted her again post-mortem. He then finally cut off both of her breasts, which the police had already noted when they found her. Brudos said that he had planned to make a mold with those as well. What an absolute freak. Like, how does a person end up like this? I don't know. So after he murders Karen Sprinker, that's actually when he goes to get Sharon Wood. So that happened after Karen Sprinker. So apparently he just thought, hey, the parking garage thing worked so well on that other woman, it's going to work again. Of course, it did not work for Sharon. She got away. But the important thing here is that Brudos admits to that attack on Sharon. He also admits to the attack on the 15-year-old girl who had identified him, who also got away. So then, after these two failed attempts, Brudos finally is able to get Linda Solis. Now, you may remember from part 1, I talked about Becky, Linda's little sister, and how the last thing that she remembers about her older sister is that she was going to go shopping for her boyfriend for his birthday. She left, and then Becky never saw her again. Well, that is because when Linda Solis came back to her car from doing that shopping, she encountered Jerry Brudos. He told her that he was a security officer for the mall. He even had a little badge. Looked very legit, apparently. He told her that they thought she might have been shoplifting. He needed to ask her some questions, and he told her to go sit in his car. She doesn't suspect anything, so she does comply. But once he has her in his car, he gets in and he drives her to his house. He gets her in the garage, locks her away, and then literally goes and eats dinner with his family. Just like goes in, what's up, Darcy? Hey, kids. How was work? How was school? Delicious fettuccine. Okay, gotta go now. Just no feeling at all. When he's done with his succulent meal prepared by his wife, he heads just a few feet away, back to the garage, and strangles Linda. Can you imagine? How did Darcy not know? How can your spouse be murdering people in the house that you share a few feet away while you're home and you have no idea? We'll get to that in a minute. There's some information, but we'll get to it. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Brudos actually assaults Linda as he is strangling her to death, which is just a next level of sadism and cruelty. Now, do you remember that I said they found those burn marks on Solis' side during the autopsy, and they could see that they were burn marks, but they really couldn't tell why she had been burned or what she had been burned with? Well, Brudos says that after he had killed her, now remember he's an electrician by profession, so presumably he has a bunch of like electrical stuff and like electrical understanding. He said that he had put 2 hypodermic needles into her side and then attached these like electrodes to them and sent electricity into her body, just like in an attempt to make her jolt or jump, like some kind of reanimation or something. I mean, this is completely unhinged stuff. He has to know that that's probably not going to work, but he's compelled to try it anyway. And now we've gone just from absolute brute force to this weird experimentation. He again is escalating, and he's escalating very quickly. Fortunately, this would be his last escalation because they caught him before he could kill again. But he was gonna kill again. He was trying. He was out looking for women to victimize. Lock him up. Throw away the key, right? Okay, so as I promised, we're going to now revisit the situation with Mrs. Brudos. Now, as with all of these guys who have spouses, I always wonder how the wife doesn't know, right? You've got somebody who's committing these horrific crimes. I can kind of understand it if they're doing it elsewhere and just like coming home. But when they're doing it in the family home, sometimes when the family is there, how do you not recognize the telltale signs that something is not right with your partner? We all would like to think that our partners could not pull the wool over our eyes like this. We all hope that our little spidey sense for homicide goes off and we recognize that this is happening sooner rather than later. But we have to keep a couple of things in mind. First of all, for people like us, you and I, we're not necessarily the exact same as every average person, right? We are true crime junkies. It's easy to forget this, but most people don't spend hours and hours of their lives listening to the gruesome details of the lives and crimes of some of humanity's absolute worst specimens. Whether you're relatively new to the true crime community or your fascination started in elementary school when you would stay home sick from school and watch unsolved mysteries. We are all a special breed. We are naturally curious. We're always on the lookout for a puzzle to solve. We're not just interested in what people do, but why they are doing it. And by and large, we tend to be a little bit suspicious. Most people are out there looking for a wolf amongst the sheep, but we know that the biggest, baddest wolves are out there in the field eating grass in their very best sheep carcass suit. What I'm saying ultimately is that we're looking for this kind of stuff because we're interested in it and we've consumed a lot of media that tells us to look out for these red flags and stuff like that. Most people just aren't. They're just not looking for murderers everywhere. So that's point one. Point two. When it comes to spouses not realizing that their partner is doing horrific crime, you have to remember that victims of mental and or physical abuse are less likely to spend a lot of time questioning what's going on. Pretty much going to say husband and wife because that is usually the dynamic that we see. So generally a husband who is presumably the criminal, has a lot of control over his wife. Maybe it's not physical, maybe it's just emotional, maybe it's mental, but there is some kind of domination going on there. The wife can turn a blind eye very easily. When you're in a situation like that, you are in survival mode all the time. So looking for reasons to stir up trouble is probably not what you are trying to do. That's something that they don't have control over and is something that they are going to do, that ignoring signs of anything else going on. That's something that they're going to do without thinking about it. It's not a conscious choice. It's something almost like a brainwashing. My third point to this is we cannot underestimate people's ability to lie to themselves. If something is just too painful to believe, we cannot overestimate humans' capabilities of self-delusion. Your brain is always trying to protect itself from harm, and when you are faced with the possibility that the man that you love or your child or even maybe your parent is doing something this horrible, you can just ignore the signs. A human being can just lie to themselves like everything is perfectly, no, it's perfectly normal. Perfectly normal for a husband to go and spend hours and hours away in a garage that is locked and I'm not allowed to go into. That's fine. That's fine. This happens all the time. And not always about big stuff. We can lie to ourselves about all kinds of small stuff. I've been deluding myself into believing that I can pull off a crop top. I can't. This is a completely normal part of human behavior. So we can't really blame anybody for that either. Now, let's talk specifically about Darcy Brudos. The situation that we have with Darcy is that she was arrested and charged, which is almost unheard of. She maintained from the very beginning that she had no idea what her husband was up to. She had no idea that this was happening in her home. She was completely clueless. She did know about his fetish for ladies' shoes. She knew about him liking to wear lingerie. Apparently he would do that in front of her from time to time. And she had also seen the paperweight that he had made out of the breast, which he had some story for about it being like a gag gift, and which she totally, apparently, supposedly, completely bought. That was fine. That all tracked for her. She also knew about him developing nude photos. He had a dark room on the premises that he would develop these nude photos of women. Apparently, it never occurred to her to ask him where he was obtaining these photos from. Spoiler alert, he was getting them from his victims. She didn't ask any questions. But again, we are talking about a woman who was abused by this man. Why would she ask any questions? Would you want to know? Would you want to know if you felt like you were trapped in the situation? You weren't going to be able to get out anyway? Would you want to know what he was up to? Would you ask a lot of questions? I probably wouldn't. I don't know. I sympathize with Darcy. She said she never heard any strange sounds or noises coming from the workshop area. She said she never saw him carrying a body or anything in or out of there. And that's that. But Darcy was arrested anyway because a witness, was a neighbor of the Brudoses, came forward and claimed that she had seen Darcy and Jerry together carrying a body from the car into his garage. Exclusively on this witness statement, prosecutors charged Darcy with 1 count of accessory to murder. However, this witness testimony apparently did not hold up to any kind of scrutiny at trial, and ultimately the case was just thrown out and dismissed because they had no evidence that Darcy had helped her husband in any way. And honestly, again, my personal opinion, I don't even care if she did help him. I don't care if she did, because if she had helped him, it would have been under duress. It would have been under threat, and that's not accessory to murder. Darcy is also Jerry's victim, and I don't think that she should be charged. If she did help him, it was not because she was an active, willing participant. And imagine that she did suspect or even knew that he had killed these women. That's in the back of her mind, that he is capable, that he is a killer. So he comes to her and he says, Darcy, I need your help. You come and help me do this. What's she going to do? Is she going to say no? No, she's going to say yes, because she's going to know what he's capable of and she doesn't want to die. So I don't think that she helped him, but regardless of if she did or didn't, she shouldn't be charged. Absolutely not. Most likely, this neighbor is just some busybody who needs some attention or is like mad that Darcy stole her lemon poppy seed muffin recipe. That's just my take. So Brudos confessed. He gave all the dirty little details according to him, and that is important to remember. All of these details, we only know from his mouth. So anything that cannot be confirmed with like an autopsy, we have to take maybe with a grain of salt, because the only information that we have is what Jerry himself told us. Although, if he was trying to lie to make himself look better, He failed miserably at that. I don't see how he could really look any worse than he does. But now it's time to go to trial. Here's the problem. They have a confession of 4 murders, but they only have 2 bodies. And even when somebody confesses, we've discussed this before, you know how this works. Even when somebody confesses, you still have to have some kind of proof. You can't necessarily convict somebody of first-degree murder when there's no evidence for it, even if they've confessed. So they only have Linda Sully and Karen Sprinker's remains. But fortunately for investigators, this perverted psycho liked to take lots and lots of pictures. And he liked to take these pictures both pre and post-mortem. They found photos in that torture chamber of 3 of his 4 confessed victims. Only Linda Slauson, his very first murder victim, was missing. He didn't take any photographs of her apparently, or didn't keep them. But the other 3, including Jan Whitney, were all there. This still, though, is just a tad bit shaky, because even though it's pretty damning, that is really just circumstantial. All that really proves is that he's in possession of the pictures. It doesn't really prove that he took them. It doesn't prove that he killed anybody. It doesn't even prove that he was there when the photos were taken. And it does seem obvious to us, but that could make reasonable doubt. So the real nail in Jerry's coffin comes when they find one photo that Jerry had taken of a victim over a mirror. And included in that photo is a nice clear shot of Jerry's face reflected in the mirror holding the camera. Now they absolutely have what they need to convict Jerry of Jan Whitney's murder as well, even without a body. This is so typical. Even though he confessed, Jerry still tries to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. Now, I know we've been over this 1,000 times, but just a reminder, because I know some countries are a little bit different. Here in the U.S., if you're going to plead insanity, you have to prove that at the time you committed the crime, in this case murder, you did not know right from wrong. You were out of touch with reality in some way, completely out of control of your body, and you were not able to know the difference between right and wrong. That is actually very difficult to prove. So unless someone is in a completely psychotic state, you're probably not going to get insanity. But everybody tries it. We clearly know this guy is not mentally well, but that does not make him insane by a legal definition. Oftentimes a telltale sign is that generally people who meet the legal definition for insanity have not tried to cover up their crime in any way, right? It's done because they're hallucinating or something like that. They usually don't try to hide that they've committed this crime because they don't even have the mental faculty to realize that they've done something wrong or illegal. So to me, that's kind of a good rule of thumb. And Brudos simply does not fit this profile. Right? He knew what he was doing. He did it intentionally. He tried to keep from being found out. He's not legally insane. Of course, they did have him evaluated by psychiatrists, etc. And they all came to the same conclusion. This guy is completely wacko, but he knew right from wrong. So when the insanity thing didn't work out, he went ahead and just pled guilty to the first-degree murders of Jan Whitney, Linda Sully, and Karen Sprinker in exchange for 3 life sentences with the possibility of parole. They were not ever able to charge him with Linda Slauson's murder simply because they had nothing to tie him to her except his own verbal confession. There were no pictures. There were no remains ever found. They just unfortunately could not do that. But the important part is that even 3 life sentences with the possibility of parole, the parole board's never letting this guy out. Are you kidding? He's never going to get parole. He's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. So he's locked up. His wife, the year after he was sentenced, divorces him. Shocker, I know. She moves out of state, takes the kids, changes their names, and presumably lives out the rest of her life in anonymity. And good for her, man. Good for her. Speaking of Jerry being locked up while he was in prison, he would order women's shoe catalogs to be delivered to the jail. And he said he used them like other people might use pornography. He had stacks of these things sitting around his cell. It's just creepy. Why is he allowed to have that? I feel like intent should matter. They wouldn't let prisoners have Playboy. That's Playboy to him. Restrict it. So although Jerry confessed to 4 murders and he was convicted of 3 of them, there are a lot of people out there, including some law enforcement, who wonder if those were all of his victims. Because apparently there are still like a dozen or so unsolved missing persons cases, apparently, of young women from the Portland, Oregon area from during the time that Jerry was active. I wonder, and I think a lot of people wonder, could Jerry have been responsible for some of these? Why would he confess to 4 and not to more if he had been who knows? You know, maybe he thought he would be able to work a deal out there at the end. You know, lots of killers do that. Or maybe he thought that the sentence would be worse, or who knows, really. We probably will never know if he was responsible for any of those. There could also have been another killer in the area at the same time. That's frightening. It's theorized that he may not have actually confessed to all of the victims he had. Anyway, Jerome Henry Brudos was put in the Oregon State Penitentiary on June 28, 1969, and that is where he stayed until March 28th of 2006, when he died of liver cancer. I can't say that I feel very bad for him. Man, this one was a toughie. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I hope that you found my coverage on the Jerry Brudos case interesting and enlightening for both parts 1 and 2. Maybe you found out something that you didn't know before. I know that I found out lots of stuff while I was researching this that I didn't know. Tell me what you thought in the comments. I love hearing from you guys. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe if you have not subscribed already. And other than that, do something to take care of yourself today and every day. And I will see you next time. Bye.